Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shane Combs. He's Matt Combs, and we're coming to you here on show 64, where we're going to be talking assistant coaches and all the different roles that these extremely important people play, not just in programs, but in supporting young student athletes throughout the area. And yeah, hope you had a Merry Christmas. Getting back at it now with a lot of basketball starting up. I know I've been watching some high school games on film here today, as putting away some of the presents there from Santa. Well, as always, want to thank Dr. Chris Good for the support here on the YouTube channel. If you're out there listening to us on the podcast app, look us up on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, know that you can get us anywhere you get your podcast and listen to us on your travels to and from work. And Matt, as we get settled back in here, welcome to another show here, show 64. Talk to us a little bit about assistant coaches and what brings up this topic this particular time of year.
Shane, when we're out watching games or we're talking to people, we get questions sometimes. I think and you can tell the people, but I think you had mentioned to me people asking you like, "Hey, why do some schools have two assistant coaches sitting over there? Some schools have six or seven, right? And how do coaches kind of choose their assistants? Why do some have more than others? Some of these questions have come up, and it's interesting. It's an interesting topic. And it's one that I think that as you and I were asked these questions and we were kind of bouncing ideas off each other for a show, this topic kind of kept rearing its head. Really just wanting to dive in a little bit to assistant coaches, what role they play, how head coaches sort of go into choosing their assistant coaches, the role the schools play in this, just some different angles of it really. And I think honestly it could serve for an interesting conversation.
One of the first things that ended up coming to my mind, Matt, I'll just throw it out there and then I'll let you kind of guide where you want to go first. But uh, a particular thing that really come to my mind in terms of a lot of people like being a coach um, much more than they like coaching. And I guess what I mean by that is, if I'm being fair, there's so many incredible coaches out there that put an amazing amount of time into it. And then you do come across some people um, that you meet and throughout years and years of coaching, and they're great people, and they're pretty smart basketball people for that matter. But it's kind of more of I get the sense that they enjoy the title of being a coach more than they love coaching, and they love the grind. And I guess maybe that goes into roles, maybe that goes into different things that they're doing, time commitments, whatever it may be. And we're going to get into all that. But that's the first thing that had come to my mind. It's the very first thing I put down in my notes. And I wanted to get your response on that before you get us started down your agenda here this week.
Well, I think there's probably some truth to that. I think that there are parts of coaching that are really, really fun. Honestly, as an assistant coach, you probably get to do more of those things and less of the things that aren't as fun. I think the head coach ends up having to sort of be the one probably to deal with some of those issues that are the not so fun issues. Not just stuff like, dealing with an unhappy parent or dealing with, you know, your administration maybe explaining something that's happened or dealing with some um, the media fundraising, all this type of stuff, right? A lot of times it kind of falls on the head coach and the assistant coach. A lot of times they just get the coach, right? Which that's the fun part. But I still think that there are some assistant coaches that give great effort and pour themselves into it. And like you said, there's probably some that just kind of do the bare minimum and maybe just want to be a part of it more than, like you said, really put the hours in. But I think that comes down a little bit too, Shane, and I don't know how you feel about it. I think some of that falls on the head coach in terms of when they not only when they choose their assistants, but when a head coach has his staff or her staff and they start putting in they start discussing the roles that these various coaches are going to play and what's expected of them. It's like anything else in leadership, right? Before we dove into this basketball season of our podcast, so to speak, we've talked leadership now for 50 plus shows, and one of the things we always talked about was part of the leadership is the people that you lead. providing them with clear, concise expectations of what we're trying to do. And don't you feel like it's kind of the same way with head coach to assistant coach? So I think if an assistant coach is, like you say, sort of just there to be, kind of maybe one foot in, 1 foot out type of thing, do you feel like that falls on the head coach a little bit to step in there and make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of the standard?
It's certainly an interesting leadership dynamic. You're exactly right. I guess that's why when I look at it, I look at two parts of it. I look at a hiring of an assistant or a staff,
Mhm.
and then I look at it as roles. And I guess what I would throw to you as someone who has been doing this a long, long time, do you, which one's first? Do those things coexist? Do you have a role you want have in mind, or a type of assistant you want, and then you go and hire? Or are you trying to hire the person first and then connect them to the best role possible? Take those two dynamics for me and talk to me about the order or the process that goes through your mind when you go through that.
In my mind, Shane, when it comes to hiring, and I don't care if we're talking about hiring coaches, you're talking about hiring people in some organization, teachers, whatever you're doing, I think to me, you always hire the person first and build your organization around great people and then find roles for those people. Okay. And that's kind of the way I believe. So I guess to answer your question, to me, it would be the hiring process or selection process would come before the assigning of roles. I think as for me and as a head coach, when I was putting my staff together, it was I always started, and I guess this is where we could start this part of the discussion, Shane. The number one priority for me was working with people that I felt like I could trust, people that I felt like were going to be loyal, not necessarily loyal to me, but loyal to our process as a group, and people that I could work with and trust. Not necessarily people that I never felt like I had to be best friends with them, and I certainly wasn't looking to hire yes men, Shane, that would just tell me how smart I was and agree with everything I said, because that defeats the purpose, right? But so that's let's not confuse loyalty with agreement. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that you can trust, that that when things aren't going well, they're not behind your back saying things about the kids, saying things about the program, saying things about you, that that we're all in this together. We all have a role to play, and so I always started with did I feel like this was a good person? This is the type of person I could work with. I remember from the moment I became a head coach at a little school called Portsmouth East. I was down there, and I was fortunate enough to have a really really close friend of mine, Jeff Miller, who people know now as a head coach, who's had a lot of success as a head coach himself. But at the time, I was fortunate that he was able to come down there with me to be my assistant at Portsmouth East. It gave me somebody I could trust, that I knew. And we were, as we looked for a JV coach down there, and again, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. You're in a little small school down in Sciotoville. You don't have, your total pick of assistant coaches here. It's not like you just got named Ohio State's coach and you've got, you can just go pick your staff from the best people all over the country. Sometimes when you're a high school coach, you're just sort of choosing from what's available. And so I was lucky to find a guy by the name of Todd Gilliland, who was a young kid at the time, probably 19 years old, 20 years old. And now he's went on to be a successful football coach himself at Portsmouth West. But I could tell right away with Todd that here's a guy that's going to relate to kids. Here's a guy that's going to be loyal. Here's a guy whose heart's in the right place. So I was comfortable taking him on. So I guess for me, Shane, the very first thing I look for is, what type of person am I going to be working with all year long? What type of person am I going to be putting around my kids? And so that's really, really important to me as a head coach, to look for the right fit that way before I even think about roles.
Well, that's good stuff. So once you have the person and you start to think about roles, the next thing I was curious about is how do you go about assigning the roles? Are you looking at the strengths and weaknesses of that person that you hired? Are you looking at your strength and weaknesses in terms of how this person can kind of supplement you and help lift you in some areas that maybe you're not as good at? Is it an offensive thing? Is it a defensive thing? Is it How much does strategy even come into play? How much of it is culture pieces, player relationships, all those different dynamics? I hear young coaches talk to me about that all the time. Give me some comments on those particular things.
Well, I would go back to, well, let me put it to you this way. If I go back for just a second, Shayne, to the actual selection process, right? Because I think it leads into that.
Hmm.
We just talked about the importance of trying to find a good fit from just the type of people that you want to work with and be around, right? But then you start to look at, okay, what are these coaches' individual abilities as a coach too, right? Because we all have strengths and weaknesses. Like what's this coach's ability? How does he relate to kids, right? Does he have a similar personality to you, or could he be more of a yin to your yang type thing? In other words, if you're a coach who's a five, kind of in your face, passionate, maybe you want your assistant coach to be a little more mellow, right? Because you want a little balance there. Does this particular coach have a great knowledge of a certain area of the sport? Does he have a great offensive knowledge, great defensive knowledge? Um, what was if he was a really good player, was he a post player? Maybe that's an area he could teach. Was he a guard? So you start to look and see what areas could you fit him into in terms of your skill development work and all this stuff. What's their You mentioned it earlier, what's their level of commitment and work ethic? Is this a person that can be there at every practice for you? Is this a person that's a paid assistant, a volunteer assistant? We'll get into some of those things. There's so many things there, Shayne, I think you have to think about as a head coach as you are, assigning those roles. So I think, again, it goes back to that selection of, okay, I think this person's a good fit from the standpoint of he'll be loyal to the program, he'll do things the right way, he'll relate to kids well. Now, what are his other areas of strength? And then from there, we can start to look at some roles. Some roles you can put him in.
Well, it's really interesting because I think the assistant coaches throughout the entire program, and when I say assistant coaches, I'm even referring to the head coaches of the levels underneath the varsity level. So not just a varsity
Right,
assistant.
right,
I'm referring to a JV coach, a freshman coach, an eighth grade coach. And in today's time, that goes all the way down to your third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade playing out on separate days all over Southern Ohio. That there's a representation of the name on the front of their jersey, like it or not, that's your program.
right.
And and I think empowering people and trusting people, that those are all really really important culture. And I touched on this on a previous show with you, and I wanted to circle back to it because I thought it was really good, and it certainly applies to tonight. So I think it's really worthy of getting a comment from you. The word empowering your assistant. So once you've hired them and you feel like you've started to have a pretty good role, do you feel like the relationship piece kind of gave them that ability, or do you think through the role assignment that you're trying to form that in terms of empowering, to where there's no way a head coach can see everything? He or she's going to have help in terms of things that happen on the bench, things that happen in the locker room, things that happen all over the gym at
Right,
practice, right?
right.
Things that happen on the bus, things that happen in school, whatever it may be. Having quality assistant help, yes, they understand their role, but at the same time, there's going to come points throughout the season that they must be empowered to act as a coach. How much responsibility is that on the head coach, and where does the hiring and the role assignment, or that discussion, how does all of that blend together? If you understand what I'm asking there, to kind of help, because I really think these things I'm asking you about here are centerpieces of culture, which we've talked so much about in leadership.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you find a staff where assistant coaches are sort of unsure of what their role is, or they really don't know you know, when to speak up, when not speak up, I think, I think that quite frankly, that falls on the head coach. That's the fault of the head coach in those situations, because I think as a head coach, it's your job to really, really be, um, to really, really give each assistant coach a role that they play for your team, and a clear and concise idea of what that role is. And again, it goes back to a little bit of when you select those coaches, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. But for instance, if you're going to have coaches sitting over there, um, any coach sitting over there on that bench on a Friday night varsity game, they need to have a role to play. And there might be some guys who that role is simply they've got a clipboard and they're charting something, right? Maybe they're charting the other team's paint touches on offense or offensive rebounds, whatever maybe your concern is that night. You might have one coach just in charge of your timeout foul situation, right? You may have, but then you may have some coaches who play a bigger role, and they may call your offenses. They may, when I at the end of my coaching career, at least, I'd had a great relationship with my assistant NJ Kite, who's now the head coach at Benton County. We were to a point where he kind of called our set plays. He handled the offensive side of things. He called that stuff. I had another coach, Jaron Cox, who had been a head boys coach and a head girls coach. He called all of our out of bounds under. And what really made it nice for me is those guys were so good at their role. Like, for instance, Jaron calling the out of bounds under. Some people might look at that as not a big role. I look at that as a very important role because we're trying to score on our out of bounds underneath plays. And Jaron would actually watch film, right? And guess what he was watching? He was watching how the team we were getting ready to play defended out of bounds under. Did they play zone? Did they play man? Did they cover up the inbounder? Did they slough off to help and clog the paint? Did they switch? Did they deny? Right? He's looking at all this stuff. Then he's charting we usually had 10 to 15 out of bounds plays, and we'd say these 7 or 8 out of bounds plays are the ones we're going to go to tonight. We think these 3 or 4 are automatic buckets if we execute, right? He's doing all that work before we even get to the game, Shayne. So I think that having guys like that, giving them a role, it takes that off of the head coach. Then you can concentrate on some other stuff, and it allows, I think what it offers the assistant coaches is understanding, is buy-in. Really, they know they have a role to play. They're going to dive in. They're going to go at it hard, and they know they're a part of a team, right? I mean, they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and I think that ultimately that's what the head coach's responsibility is with his staff, just the same as it would be a superintendent with his principals or a principals with his teachers, right? In education or whatever, same way in coaching.
Well, there's no question. You mentioned like just something like the foul trouble and the timeout. I don't think the average fan on a game night understands how quick it happens. And if you haven't coached before, you may not understand what I mean. If you've coached and you're listening to this, you're shaking your head and you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a call. It's so and so second foul or third foul or fourth foul, whenever it may be in the course of the game. Well, who's the player? Who is the player? What's the score? How much time's left in the quarter? The head coach is arguing with the official. They're not happy with the call, right? And before you know it, the ball's inbounded. Well, what foul? Is that what the book has? Who they call that on? Hey, who do they call it? Is that her second? Is that his third? You know what I'm saying? Like we've all heard that dialogue before, and it happens, and that ball's going back in bounds in no time. Um, Same way with timeouts. Your head as a head coach is just spinning in certain situations, and you constantly want to be reminded in that late game situation. Hey, Matt, you have 3 left. You have 3 left if you need them. You know what I mean? It's one of those where it's such an important thing, and sometimes I see assistant coaches even start to get outside their role where the most important thing they can be doing is reminding the head coach, hey, so and so has 3, or you have 2 timeouts, and they're too invested into the game. Does that make sense? So it really is what you're talking about is identifying a role, empowering the coach, letting them be invested in it, but then also talking back and forth in terms of what's our philosophy as a staff? How do we want to handle those situations? And you're right. So much of that stuff is talked about way before the ball's thrown up for tip, right? It's one of those things that it goes into film session, it goes into scouting report, it goes into discussion. I hear football coaches all the time say, we're not always deciding if we're going to go for extra point or 2 on the spot there. We've really taken time to put thought down into a sheet, and we have a sheet ready. So it's that same type of stuff in basketball. And you're right. If you have those particular coaches on the bench and they shine in those roles, game management of that coaching staff is going to be amazing. I see so many opportunities to get kids out of a game, 2 fouls, 40 seconds on the second quarter, trying to survive the half. You go on defense, a chance to get that person out. You don't get that person out, he or she picks up their third. You see what I'm saying? It's,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not saying it's right or wrong to take them out. I'm saying that the head coach has to be given that information. Hey, Matt, so and so has two. What do you think about, getting him right here? Keep him from getting a third. That
Yeah.
that type of thing. Is that stuff? Am I over speaking that? Because it's been a long time since I've been in that chair. The second half of my career has been more of an assistant coach's role, and I'll be honest, the coaches I've coached for, I've had multiple roles. I had different types of roles, but to me, that's very, very valuable game management stuff just to have as kind of a calming influence.
Yeah, no, you're sitting here as you're talking, Shane. It's just kind of reminding me. I'm thinking back over some of the years and different staffs I've had, different way we've approached it. But because as a head coach, you grow over the years, right? You improve, and maybe early on you didn't do it this way, and then we changed it and started doing it this way. And one of the things that we used to do as a coaching staff when we were sitting around the office, we would just kind of discuss. We had a sheet that we put together of potential special situation type of things. You know what I mean? And how we wanted to handle. For instance, here's one that coaches don't always agree on. If you're up three, right? You're up three with 8 seconds left. The other team's bringing the ball up to four. Do you foul? Right? Do you foul? Don't or do you just play defense? And there's arguments both ways of that. We used to discuss as coaching staff with because a lot of times sometimes it's what kind of team you have, right? And just how you think they'll react to it. And we used to talk about our philosophies on that. And that way, when you're in those situations, you like you talked about with the extra point example from football, is you've already sort of made that decision in some ways, right? You've kind of said to yourself, this is what I believe in and this is what we're going to do. And then obviously, if you're going to believe in that, you practice it, right? At some point, every now and then you put 8 seconds on the clock and you actually run through that scenario in practice. So yeah, I think that and I think that you have to have coaches watching for those things. I can remember I tried to pass out little index cards to my coaches before each game and said, "Here's what I want you to watch for tonight." And a lot of them had a role they played all the time, right? Like I just went over with a coach doing out of bounds and a coach doing offenses, whatnot. But sometimes I would give my other coaches, my JV coach, my freshman coach, maybe a volunteer assistant, hey, here's a couple things I'm worried about tonight. I want you to keep an eye on this. You know what I mean? Like I'm really worried about this team, how we guard the ball screen. I want you kind of charting tonight, like the results of every time they ball screen so we can get an idea and at halftime maybe we adjust or whatever, so that you have some coaches watching for some specific things. But I do think in today's game, as fast paced as it is, and when I say fast paced, I feel like I feel like when fouls are called, Shane, right now, or whatever, a ball gets kicked out of bounds, but more importantly, foul gets called, the ball gets inbounded really quickly. I don't know if that has been a point of emphasis, sort of, with officials because I'm not in their meetings. You know what I mean with the OHSA. But do you feel like sometimes there's not so like you're talking about a kid commits a foul and if you don't make a decision very quickly on whether to take them out of the game, they may be out there in live play in foul trouble, right? So you better have
Mhm.
coaches over there that maybe are just in charge of that type of thing. I heard a situation the other night, and I don't know if this has anything to do with coach. I don't think this is a coach's fault. It was more of a bookkeeper issue. There was a situation the other night in the Tri Valley Conference, okay, where a team's best player fouled out. All right. The coach takes the kid out because it's his fourth foul. The ref comes over and says, Coach, that's five. And the coach is like, whoa, whoa, that's four. Well, the home book had five. This particular team's book had four. They went back and watched the film later. It was four. It was
Mm.
only his fourth. So in that situation, the coach was doing the right thing, the assistant coach, keeping track, but the book had it wrong. And again, if you don't have an experienced bookkeeper who fights that battle early, because the experienced bookkeepers are constantly checking, right, with each other. They're like, hey, what do you got for him? Is that his third? Yeah. But again, that's a whole different podcast probably when you get into volunteers, right? People like that. But some people have experience books, some people don't. My point is, it's so important to keep track of these details because of just the craziness that could happen if you don't. So, no, I'm with you on that, Shayne. I think that because don't you feel like this when you're talking about roles too as coaches? It's assistant coaches. You've got your in game. I think we're talking a lot about in game roles right now, but then you also have your practice roles. Like, what kind of roles do you play each day in practice? Do you have a guy who's a really good skill development coach, that can maybe do some breakdown stuff with kids? Are you giving your offensive coach time to work on the sets? Are you giving your defensive coach time to drill on, how we're going to guard ball screens, how we're going to, handle just your typical, down screen or whatever? Um, do you feel like you almost have to divide those roles up, Shayne, into in practice and in a game?
Well, if you want to be sharp, if you want to be efficient, if you want to keep the attention of today's kid, I think you have to. You talked earlier about having different personalities. I know this is something Joe Wisecup taught me all the way back at the age of 19, 20 years old as being a young assistant coach. Like, hey, some of the times that I'm on a kid, that may be a time for you to be real positive and pick the
Mhm.
energy up. You know what I mean? If
Right.
I'm in a real positive mood and things are going good, every now and then you may want to go out of character and be a little bit uh not on the negative side, but to rip a little bit and to see if you can't get attention of a certain kid or what. And he was just teaching me how coaches can play off of each other in the practice setting. As time has gone on in my career, I think the preparation is so important. The way you maximize that hour and a half to 2 hour block that's on that calendar for that Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, whatever it may be, really comes down to the preparation. And it goes back to having great communication with your staff. I think sometimes you can really save yourself in terms of burnout, in terms of like if you go to a coach and say, look, I need 15 minutes. We've really struggled just in terms of just unforced turnovers. I need 12 to 15 minutes on tonight's practice. I'm going to turn it over to you. I need really just detailed pivoting, fundamentals, ball fakes. I need an emphasis on that. I need you to put us through a drill. I want a little bit of positive energy. I want some attention to detail. Hey, this coach, I need you in scouting report. I need these clips. I need this a particular thing in the scouting report. I don't know how you kind of done that in the past, Matt, but I just think having those things prepared and finding a way to invest all the adults in the process goes a long way in terms of again that culture piece and getting all the kids to invest in the culture and the preparation throughout that week as well. What's been your experience in terms of maybe as a younger coach, was there a time where you look back and like, man, I lacked preparation there? And then as you got older, felt like you got a lot better at that.
Yeah, for me, preparation has always been so important to me, and I've talked about it before in terms of putting together a practice plan or whatever. I always just really, took a lot of pride in that and put a lot of time into that. But where I failed early on as a coach, for sure, was delegation. When you start talking about your staff, like really allowing your staff, maybe turning over some of that responsibility in practice to your staff and letting them kind of run with it. Because I think there's so much positive to that. Because if you're lucky enough to have additional staff in practice, because again, I guarantee you there's coaches that listen to this thinking, well, I got one guy with me or one coach with me and that's it. Or some days I'm the only one in the gym by myself, right? But if you're lucky enough to have two, three, four coaches in practice, I'm talking about now, okay? Why not have some of those guys running a drill on their own? Why not? It gives you a little bit of a break as a coach, lets you catch your breath, kind of get your thoughts together in the next drill. It's important for kids to hear different voices because they start to tune one voice out sometimes. And if you can go with some different voices, right, it keeps kids fresh. I think it's just good for them to hear that. You had mentioned again that sort of yin yang thing of the balance, right? Of one coach maybe being, uh, you know, having a day where they're really on edge and sort of intense and maybe ripping butt a little bit, and now all of a sudden you got this other guy coming in. It's kind of good cop, bad cop sometimes, right? But again, I think that can be important too. So if you have your coaches at if you have coaches available at your practice, then why not utilize those coaches in every way that you can? I think that the best practices I've ever had were the ones where we had a gym full of coaches, because I really tried to use those guys. Like, did you ever notice, Shayne? Like in boys basketball, especially, it seemed like you get to the tournament level, right? You start practicing sectional district tournament, and you'd have all your coaches, because freshman was over, JV was over. So all of a sudden, those guys are coming to varsity practice. Well, now, I mean, I felt like a college coach then, because I was like, man, I got all these coaches. You guys go over to this basket, we could break down. I said, I wish I could do that all year long. And I coached at a school at Vinton County that was very generous with their assistant coaches. I mean, keep in mind, I had two paid varsity assistants. That's all they did. I had a paid JV. I had a paid freshman. Now think about that: two paid assistants, a paid JV, a paid freshman. That's more than a lot of schools have all the way down through junior high. I get it. We got people, we can talk a little bit about that too. The investment schools making their coaches, right? Because there are schools that don't pay very many coaches. So now you're dealing with volunteers, you're dealing with parents coaching and all that. But my point is, I was fortunate to have those coaches. So I know I really try to utilize them. And I would think that any coach that was fortunate enough to have those assistants would delegate some of that stuff and allow those coaches to be involved.
As I was thinking today, I heard someone talking. You ever seen the commercial where they have the what's it called, like the gorilla tape or glue or whatever it is, and they'll
Yeah,
show like
yeah,
the hole in the boat, and they'll patch it up, right? They'll be out on the water, just sail it away, and no water getting in. And someone was making fun of that. They were saying like, whenever it comes time to tape your boat, you may want a new boat, right? Well,
yeah,
I was laughing at that, but I got to thinking, sometimes it's not that easy. That's the rich guy speaking, right?
right,
It's sometimes it's not that easy. Like, no, you don't understand. I'm taping that boat so that I can have a boat. If I don't tape it, there is no boat, and I can't afford a new boat. Like
right.
it, I don't know why it came to mind when you were saying that, but I think a lot of situations are a lot more favorable, and people take that for granted. And I think that, like you just reminded really well there, use your resources. If you're lucky enough to have them, use them, because it may not be as easy as, well, I'll just go hire these two or three people. But if you have some of these people that are involved, or they're willing to be involved, empower them a little bit, bring them along, train them to do different things. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think sometimes people fail. I remember hearing Tom Izzo speak at a clinic one time, and he talked about giving the night maintenance guy a national championship ring, because he knew that the behind the scenes stuff he had done of letting the guys in the gym and getting them extra shots, and kind of cleaning this a little bit, or fixing this for the basketball program a little bit, or kind of doing them a little favor here and there. And it's that relationship culture piece. So I guess before we moved on, Matt, I just wanted to comment on what you're saying there, because don't you think all leaders are guilty sometimes of not using in some way every resource that is available to them? And sometimes they're spoiled because they don't realize, hey, the head coach over here to my right or over here to my left may not have those particular resources. Life could be a lot harder.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there, Shayne. I can remember one particular coach years ago in the Tri Valley Conference who I felt like was a solid coach. And he himself had been at this school for a number of years, and I can remember every single year. You go to play the first time you play the team, right? You walk down, you shake the coach's hand before the game. Kids are out there warming up. You're like, "Hey, coach, how's things going? All right, man. How about you?" Blah blah blah. You're talking, and every single year I'd be shaking the hand of like new assistant coaches. Like I didn't recognize these guys. The head coach was a staple of the program, but here's a new assistant this year. Yeah, I don't know who this guy is. I shake, hey, how you doing, man? And it just got me thinking, like, why? I wonder why this guy's got different assistant coaches every year and different. Well, come to find out, the school he was at, they didn't pay guy. Most of his assistants had to be volunteers. So guess what happened? You what happens when you get volunteers? You get a dad of a kid, or you just get somebody who, hey, I'll help this year, then the next year rolls around, I've got to go move on and do different things. And so now you're finding new guys, and because the school doesn't make an investment, right? So now the coach is just sort of piecing together his staff, because again, it's it's not easy finding assistant coaches, or even schools that pay. Let's be real honest; these guys aren't making a ton of money. The ones that put the work in are getting paid pennies on the dollar, really, for the hours they're putting in, right, as an assistant coach. But when you're getting paid something, I think you feel like, okay, I'm a part of this. I'm a paid person. Plus, if you are getting paid, there's a certain level of accountability there, don't you think, Shayne? Like, because so now if you're not showing up to practice, or you're not putting in the time, like, hey man, you're one of my paid assistant coaches. You got to be, so I do feel bad for some coaches who have to fight this battle, year in, year out, where maybe the school they coach at just doesn't really make that investment in their assistant coaches and in their staff. Makes it difficult.
Matt, the only other thing I really had, and I'll make sure I don't cut you off before we go to closing, is and you've heard me bring this up a lot, is I guess for lack of a better term, just professional development, and constantly wanting to get better and better and better. And I think of, obviously had a teaching degree all the way from the start, but then unfortunately I worked through a situation with the school I'm at. We had some cuts, and I had to move some different areas into some different content areas. Well, teaching is teaching, but let's face it, content area is different. You know what I mean? Like your knowledge of your content, from a language arts to social studies, or if you're U.S. history, are you world history? Are you teaching math? Are you teaching some science? That content's different, and you constantly want to be an expert in your content area. So the preparation increased. There's a lot of work that went into it. And I think coaching is the same way. I challenge people all the time. You talked about it. You had head coaches that all of a sudden, when they were in charge of out of bounds plays, they became an expert in out of bounds plays in terms of defending and who's going to do what and what teams do this and who's their best player. What are they trying to run? What are we going to try to run? And I love that, because I think the hours of film, the hours of preparation, that's part of it. But I also think it's continuing to develop in terms of learning new drills, learning different things, learning different ways to teach different fundamentals, whatever it may be. I know throughout the early part of my career, I'd have considered myself better on the offensive side in player development. As I've continued in my career, I still love the player development part of the offense. But again, the last two head coaches I coach for on the girls' side, over about a 10, 11 year window, I was more a charge of the defense. So that's something I really invested in. And I really started to watch film in a completely different way, a completely different perspective. And one of the things I enjoy now is, as I watch, is kind of getting to watch film in different areas. You know what I mean? Your mind frees up a little bit, and you see so many different perspectives. So I wonder your thoughts on professional development with your staff. Like, I know you guys have the state clinic. I know there's some different things you go to. I know you're doing your own summer camps. What off-season roles, what kind of things do you feel over the years? Maybe it's the relationship piece of you and your staff drawing closer together. What relationship pieces, or what culture pieces, or professional development pieces do you feel are important in developing and maintaining assistant coaches?
Well, I think, Shayne, I think the relationship pieces and the communication and just bouncing ideas off each other, I just feel like those need to be constant, right? Those just have to be just, normal human interaction, and you just sort of grow together through those things, right? But I think that the specific basketball stuff, I think as a head coach, you have to understand, what your assistants, like I said earlier, what your assistants' strengths are, but also I think, what your assistants ultimately, sort of what their long-term goals are, what they're looking to do too. Because I think you have to respect that as a head coach. And what I mean by that is, do you have an assistant coach who wants to be a head coach someday? Do you have an assistant coach who's more of, hey, I like what I'm doing right here. This is the lane I fit into, and I just kind of want to stay there. You know what I mean? Because I think that's okay too. Because I think back to when I first started as an assistant coach. back in the mid '90s as a really, really young guy, right? And started coaching with Ron Lovely at Uniota, and I know looking back now, and I didn't realize it at the time, but he knew that I wanted to eventually continue into coaching, and I wanted to be a head coach someday. So I'm so thankful for the fact that he recognized that and gave me responsibilities that would help me grow in that way in order to be a head coach. In other words, he gave me some responsibilities, and every year those responsibilities would grow a little bit. He'd give me a little bit more, a little bit more. And I think he had a plan of teaching me the ropes, so to speak, because he knew I wanted to continue. I think as a head coach, you have that responsibility to understand what your assistant coach's sort of ambitions are, right? And then I think sometimes you're going to have an assistant coach who, like I said, he or she's just fine with the lane they're in. Hey, listen, I just want to coach freshman basketball. I enjoy this, or I just want to coach eighth grade basketball, right? We had our own father coach junior high for years, right? He wasn't looking to move up and coach, JV. He wanted to coach junior high. That's what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine too, and you have to understand that you got people that just want to do what they do, and if they do it well, leave them alone, let them do it. Right now, that doesn't mean you don't try to offer little nuggets and help them improve, and in turn they'll help you improve. That's the thing about a head coach. When you help your assistant coaches like professionally develop, you automatically professionally develop yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you grow in that too. Those discussions you have in the coach's office, you're not just helping them. Those discussions are going to help you. We talk about this show right here, just you and I sitting here talking, but just within our preparation for the show and our note
Yeah.
taking and just bouncing ideas, we leave the show thinking, man, I learned something tonight, right?
Get
So
better every week. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I mean. So I think that I think for me, Shayne, that part of it's crucial. Just helping your staff develop, because in turn, then it'll help you develop as well.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, before I don't want to cut you off there, Matt. If you look down through your notes there, is there any main agenda pieces that we've missed that I need to give you an opportunity to introduce here?
No, I think we've covered it. I'll say this. I just think, I would encourage people as they watch games, okay? Um, because I think a lot of what we talk about on this show pertains to coaching, right? And it maybe in some small way it might help a coach who's just starting out or whatever. I don't know. Hopefully somewhere, but I would encourage people that are at a game too to pay attention, watch stuff other than the game sometime. Watch the bench, and I think what you'll find is your best programs, when you look over there on those benches, on your best programs, you're going to see coaches who all have a role to play. They're doing something, right? That every single one of those guys over there is doing something. You might see one particular guy stand up when the team's on defense, and he might be giving a signal of some kind, or vice versa, team's on offense. You're taking the ball out of bounds. You might see one coach every time a kid comes out of the game. You might see a coach go down and talk to that kid. That might be that coach's role, right? To kind of be that one-on-one guy on the bench. I encourage people to sort of watch that, because to me, it's fascinating to watch those interactions. Um, because I think the best programs, Shayne, I think have that. And I think the programs that maybe aren't as advanced are the ones where you just got some people over there in a polo that have a front row seat, right? And they're not doing as much of that. So I think those things are sort of fun to watch when you're at a game, and plus they're you learn a lot from that. I think you learn a lot from seeing things like that. So I to me, Shayne, I think we covered most of what I had in my notes. I think again, I go back to the very beginning of the show and how important it is for head coaches when they're putting their staff together to really take a lot of time, effort, and pride in that process. Even if they're shorthanded from a financial resources, financial stuff where they don't have a lot of paid assistants, even if they're at a school where they don't know a lot of people, maybe they've just been hired, right? I've been in that situation early in my career. Do your homework, ask people, hey, what's this guy like? What do you think he brings to the table? If you don't know people, do your homework, do your research, really try to put together the best staff, because you've got to work with these people. You've got to work with these people every day for an extended period of time. And oftentimes in uncomfortable, heat of the moment types of situations, you need to have people that you feel good working with. And I think the best programs do.
I love that. You mentioned watching the bench and doing different things. I love to do that myself on film or in person. And there's a girls program down in Southeast Ohio that maybe hasn't been. They've been on hard times the last couple of years, really starting to turn it around this particular year. And as I watch them, they've had some great wins and this year, and they're off to a competitive start, and they're doing a nice job. And when you watch them at, it's the little culture pieces. You can tell the way they interact. You can watch the bench. The people on the bench are as invested in success as the people on the floor, and the assistant coaches I can see playing little roles in that, and everyone's into a common goal. And I remember you asking me clear back at the beginning of our basketball season here about identity and what would I look for in different things. Well, I've watched this team play 2 or 3 times already this month, and I'll probably get a chance to see them this upcoming weekend. And that's what I noticed. I don't know that they're knocking the socks off of basketball. They've improved, but I'm telling you, I just see an investment in some of the different things they're going. And I heard Nick Saban talk about the chase is better than the capture. He was talking in an interview the other day, and if anyone that follows Nick Saban over the years knows he's a big process guy, right? He's a guy that really likes to go about, and he talks about how complaining is a distraction to the solution. And I was kind of laughing. I was like, we've all been a part of those meetings, right? And it's a situation where as you get those particular common goals in mind and you get those groups together, the assistants do play such a valuable role, and coaching staffs have the same type of chemistry, just the same as any team or any group would have. So I think that's extremely valuable. So, Matt, I'll give you the last word if you want one, and I'll close us out. But I feel like it's I just feel like that's a really good thing. Anything on this one or an upcoming show topic, things that are on your mind here before I give some information and close us out?
No, Shane, I think I covered everything I have. I am looking forward. I know we got some shows coming up. We're going to do some different things with. We're going to talk some coaching stuff more. I know we're going to talk some. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to talk some X's and O's. We haven't really done that yet, right? Where we talk some actual in-game X's and O's. We're hoping to even be able to implement some game footage for some different games throughout the area, to sort of illustrate some X and O points. That should be fun. Um, and here's the thing, just like this topic, we're probably going to have topics we don't even know we're going to have yet, because people kind of come up to us and say, hey,
Hmm.
what do you think of this? And it kind of spurs on a topic. So I know when we started this basketball only sort of show here a few episodes ago, um, I was looking forward to it, and it's been a lot of fun. It's really been fun just focusing on the basketball end of things for me, this winter, um, just because that's what I'm used to doing, right, in the wintertime. And it's been fun just kind of bouncing ideas off each other and talking things. I hope that when people listen, they enjoy it. It's like anything else. I'm sure some of the shows we do, someone may enjoy more than another, and I get that. We're not going to hit it out of the park every week, but I do think that just getting to cover these different topics, I think is interesting, and hopefully people enjoy that.
Well, I think so. I know one I've been really anxious to do. It's going to be coming up here soon. I'm not sure exactly if it'll be the next one or one of the next couple here. The positionless basketball, and talking about. I've had a lot of people. I bet 5, 6 different people talk to me this year about the point guard position. How's it changing, and how's this point guard different to this point guard, and what do you like better, and all these different things. And even talked about the different 4 out, 1 in, and how the four positions change. Like we grew up in the day of the power forward, and you throw that term out today, basketball, like what's that? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different things there. But again, we want to thank Dr. Chris Good. He supports on the YouTube side there, and if you've been listening to us on the podcast and you get a chance to turn us on YouTube, do that. Comment to us. Let us know what you think. Some of the upcoming shows, what you'd like to hear. Same way, if you haven't been able to get us on your podcast app, just wherever you find those out there. Again, expanding the zone. Can't thank you enough for listening. Can't thank you enough for the feedback, and hope everybody's enjoying the holiday time here. And we'll be back next week with another expanding the zone. So until then, appreciate everyone. Thanks.